When someone objected, Reddit's craziest wedding moments. Story 1. At my cousin's wedding, when the exchanging of vows took place, my aunt shouted, "Wasn't there supposed to be a part where you could object?" or something along those lines. The wedding itself is a whole story. It was in Arizona, and at first was going to be held in the fall, but changed to being in the summer, so it was incredibly hot out. My cousin and his wife were given money to hold a wedding, but they didn't want to spend a lot, so it was held on family land. This land was not cleaned up and had various people living on it. Intense and similar. The family made it stronger. My aunt enjoys pranks and goes too far a lot. She first wanted to put Trump posters all over the wedding venue, but we convinced her not to because the cousin is not at all a Trump supporter. She also had to be convinced not to dump dirty water on my stepmom on the day of the wedding when she had no change of clothing. She has also been under investigation for tax evasion, for buying cigarettes in bulk on international waters and selling them out of her hair salon. Story 2. A member of my wife's family had a pirate-themed wedding. A rival pirate appeared and objected to the wedding. The groom dueled him with singing and won. Story 3. The groom himself, he just stood up there and started crying, and in front of everyone told the bride that he'd fallen out of love with her a while before, but he didn't know how to break it off. It was extremely uncomfortable. They both stepped out and 10 minutes later came back out and got married because she'd apparently told him she was pregnant. They're still together with 3 kids. And I'm not sure about the husband, but I can confirm that the wife is having an affair. Neither of them are happy, but she has a comfortable life and he doesn't have the spine to leave. Story 4. Nobody had said speak now, but the groom's ex still decided to get up and scream that he was her soulmate, that she forgave him for this whole thing and that they should leave now because he'd proven his point by breaking up with her 5 years earlier, falling in love, and holding a wedding. I ate so much cake and got so drunk at that wedding. Meanwhile, everyone else was screaming and throwing good times. The bride was my boyfriend's ex. No idea why they invited us. Come enter either your boyfriend or the groom's ex were invited, because the other was don't ask your ex to the wedding or I'll be inviting mine too kind of move. Story 5. One of my friends interrupted his cousin's wedding to come out of the closet. He couldn't understand why people were so pissed at him. This was the second time my friend had come out to his family. The first time was when he was a teenager about 8 years earlier, and 90% of his family that was attending said wedding was already aware. Commenter groom. Actually, there's something I've been meaning to tell you, all of you in this room. Really, there's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to do it. Okay, here it goes. You can do this long pause. I'm gay person in the crowd. Yeah, we figured that out when you invited us to a wedding between you and this guy. Story 6. This happened very recently, but in a different manner than the other comments I'm seeing for years. Groom and best man are super close, room together, and the running joke is that they're more than friends later. On groom meets bride, falls in love, and proposes. New running joke is that best man is very disappointed that groom is marrying someone else. At the wedding, officiant asks if anyone has objections. Best man objects. Officiant quickly overrules the objection. It was planned and bride thought it was a funny way to acknowledge the super close friendship between groom and best man. Did not result in anyone being kicked out or awkwardness. Fun and surprisingly appropriate. Story 7. I was at an outdoor ceremony once with a storm coming in. The pastor was trying to move things along so that we wouldn't get caught in the rain. The reception was indoors. He asked if anyone knows of any objection, and instantly there was a loud clap of thunder. To his credit, the pastor just paused a moment and then said, "Anyone else all right in that case?" and finished the ceremony. The couple is still together and happily affect. I was the plus one, so I'm not super close to them, so take that passive aggressive supernatural objector. 2 Holy cow, I go to sleep and wake up with gold. Thanks, kind Redditor. Story 8. Only once, but it was non-romantic. The father of the bride had been pretty absentee. After her parents' divorce, he had remarried and gotten into the Christian Science religion, and they were both pretty terrible. The new wife was not invited to my friend's wedding, but the father came, and it seemed like he was there to be supportive. He stood up during vows and proclaimed my friend was just like her mother and the groom should get out while he can, because my friend was a soul-leeching succubus. Not the worst wedding I ever went to. Commenter. I'm 30 and I'm starting to think I may be bad luck, because I've been to a few disasters when most people can't name one. The highlights would be the ceremony being interrupted because the woman the groom was seeing on the side appeared with their baby, yes, their secret love baby, and the groom explaining that polygamy is natural and we should be more open-minded. The bride, my former college roommate, insisting on driving herself to the wedding and getting a DUI en route, then making an ill attempt At seducing the officer to get out of it being turned down and subsequently slapping the officer and getting arrested for assault waiting for a coworker on one of those Sunset Cruises engine fails and starts a small fire, and everyone had to evaluate the boat +1 to a wedding. The couple were completely scammed by their wedding planner. Venue wasn't actually booked, no caterer, no cake, no DJ, no nothing. She scammed them out of thousands, 250 guests milling about in a town center parking lot. They of course reported her, but I don't think they were ever able to recover much of their money. ***. Edit. A lot of people have asked how I've been to this many crazy weddings. Honestly, between college and working many different levels of jobs throughout my 20s, I just happened to be invited to a lot of weddings in general. It seems like the stress of weddings in general tend to bring out something unique. Story 9. Went to a coworker's wedding and the maid of honor objected and admitted to being the other woman and that the groom had been cheating with her for months. The bride left in tears and the groom immediately tried to get with the MO, but she told him she wasn't going to hurt the bride further and that he needs to F off. The bride is doing much better and is now a manager here, and I haven't heard from the groom in over a year. The MO and bride are on speaking terms, but I don't think their relationship is going to ever be what it used to be. Added, I don't know what's crap, sleeping with her friend's fiance or waiting until the middle of a presumably expensive wedding to tell her, and presumably in front of a crowd of friends and family. Story 10. I saw it nearly happen at my uncle's wedding. A friend of theirs got too drunk and when they said speak now, he smiled, started to stand up. My mother grabbed him by his hair and sat him back down by force. Edit. Clarification and context, it was my mother, the groom's sister. The drunk was a close friend to both the bride and groom, so he was seated up front. He's a nice dude, but sometimes a bit of a dumbass. It was a small non-traditional wedding. They were wed in the botanical gardens by a justice of the peace. The reception was held in the same place. When you entered the area for the wedding SL reception, there was an open bar, so some people helped themselves before the ceremony started and one overindulged a bit. Story 11. When I was 13, we went to my second cousin's wedding. Everything is going great. They even got past the speak now or forever hold your peace part. They wrote their own vows, but before my second cousin's fiancée wife could even begin her vows, his son got up, announced to the entire room that she was cheating on his dad with her drug dealer and he couldn't let his dad marry her. My second cousin yelled at his son to either sit down or leave. The son left. My second cousin married her anyways, and 5 years and one baby later, he finds out it was true and they separated, but were tweaked out to be able to afford a divorce. Finally, he got married a third time. But before he could get married, his third, now ex-wife, had to pay for their divorce. This wedding had no objections. They moved to Missouri, and this time, instead of separating or asking for a divorce, he decided he didn't want to be married anymore and just moved back to sea to get back together with his second ex-wife. Yup, family dinners are a little awkward. Story 12. My friend almost paid me to do it at my dad's marriage, and I was so close to agreeing, but my dad overheard and stopped me. I would have done it for free if I knew how crazy that stupid woman was back then. Story 13. It was at my wedding that we had at my grandmother's house, who lives out in the country next to a cattle farm. The cows didn't make a peep till that moment, and one finally went moo. We all laughed and continued. But it was a funny moment about my wedding. It just got to add the normal part about being my highest post and best. It's about a cow going moo. Story 14. About 5 years ago, a coworker of mine invited all of us to his wedding. He was a great guy, but none of us had ever met his wife. Seeing pictures of her, and he always said nothing but good things of her. Fast forward to the wedding. It was an incredibly nice one. Looks like they paid quite a bit for it. Everything was going smooth, and I was having fun, and assumed so was everyone else anyway. Now they're both at the altar or whatever, looking deeply into each other's eyes and smiling, and when that line comes of speak now or forever hold your peace, I get anxious, but nothing ever happens. So right as soon as the anxiousness faded away, the bride's mother stood up and objected, blurted some about how she doesn't want to continue their family with a man like him. He was black, she was white. The bride to be cried, ran off. Wedding went silent. Bride's dad took the mom and ran after the bride. The groom stood there incredibly awkward. He may or may not have achieved actually leaving his body anyway. The groomsmen took him away. I left because it was too weird. Apparently the reception went on. They did not get married that day, but ended up together anyway privately, and surprisingly work wasn't weird. He laughed about it and they are happily married. Edit, just so I don't have to individually reply to everyone's comments and questions, the mill never truly stated it was because he was black. But this guy was incredibly nice, selfless, and just someone who you completely felt comfortable around. Never judged anyone either. And well-spoken Emil also never showed signs of hating him. Who knows why it happened? Maybe the bride and groom found out. I'm not sure. I since moved and haven't spoken to them, but man, does that memory last. Story 15. A wedding I was at. One guy got up and pledged his undying love for the bride, followed by 4 or 5 others objecting for various reasons, including one guy's love for the groom by the second or third objection. Though it was clear that the whole thing was a clever ruse, I found out later that it was all set up by the bride as a prank on the unsuspecting groom and family and friends. It was pretty hilarious. Story 16. The best man at my stepsister's wedding did this. It happened at the rehearsal the night before. It was a very large wedding, and the rehearsal was bigger than a lot of weddings. The minister was going over the vows quickly, while giving instruction on what to do. When he said something about objections, the best man interrupted, saying he had to put a stop to this. He was in love with the bride and was sure she felt the same way. My sister and everyone else was horrified. It caused plenty of chaos and confusion. As far as I know, after that, neither the bride nor groom ever spoke to him again. Story 17. My wife drugged me to a wedding that I did not want to be at years ago, but I'm forever grateful that she did, because I was able to witness one of the greatest spectacles of human drama that has ever taken place. This was like an episode of Jerry Springer mixed with cops. Bride's lover spoke up at that moment and yelled, "I'll be if I'm going to keep my mouth shut and let you steal my woman, you sorry piece of." This deranged old redneck proceeds to come at the groom with a pistol, threatening to shoot him if he doesn't give her up. It wasn't a huge wedding, maybe 40 or so people, but every single one of them went screaming and running, and maybe 2 people stayed and called the cops. I grabbed my wife's hand and we retreated outside to watch the rest of the scene unfold from the church window. He was arrested for unlicensed weapon and assault, because at one point he put the gun back in its holster and just started shoving the groom. The bride was a total about the whole thing, cared more about the fact that her special day was ruined than the crap spectacle that she caused. Commenter: despite the stories, the point of the object is for reasonable and significant objections to the bonds of matrimony. Like an incomplete SL non-present divorce, one of the participants having a separate family too, it is supposed to be much more clerical and legal than social in nature. It's just that in the modern day, it's a lot less likely to have issues of this manner, so on the occasions where it's invoked, it's far more likely to be regarding infidelity, or simply someone getting too sauced to realize nothing good will come of their last-minute plea for reconciliation. Story 18. And groom's dad interrupted the wedding to ask the bride's father whether or not she was truly a virgin. Then he went on about how he didn't know anything of the wedding and blah blah blah. Truly weird and embarrassing. I was there with an ex-boyfriend. Edit: he is my ex-boyfriend. When the groom's father interrupted the wedding, the bride's father officiating the wedding did in fact say it was confirmed. I have no clue how or what. They seemed to be super conservative and wore sleeve dresses, long hair, etc., and were AF American. They eventually showed the father-in-law out and continued with the ceremony, which was super awkward afterwards. It was literally as if I was on Pranked. Said ex seemed to find the ordeal entertaining because she was humiliated. This was his family bride, and that sort of sealed the deal. Something was wrong with the guy. We broke up a week later. Story 19. I was working at a wedding when I was younger. I was running the bar at the reception, which was very close to the hall the weddings were at. We were told that the reception would begin around 4:00 p.m. It was already about 3-ish, and I was packing fridges, the usual barman things, while one of the male guests was still sitting there drinking. I asked if he was not joining the reception, to which he replied something along the lines of, "When I have the courage." He downs his drink and leaves. 10 minutes later, he's back looking extremely disappointed. Guy orders a drink, and less than 30 seconds later, another guy who's dressed extremely well, turned out to be the groom, walks and punches him in the back of the head and leaves. This dude just picked his drink up and sipped it further. I eventually found out that this dude had downed his drink, walked into the receptions down, admitted to sleeping with the wife on her hen night, and again the night before the wedding. He was never invited to the wedding. He just felt the groom needed to know, so he found out where the wedding was, suited up, and dropped the info mid-ceremony. Story 20. I went to a wedding when I was 5. It was between my older brother and his fiancée. Anyways, they said the whole speak now spiel, and right before he was done, little 5-year-old me said, "I object." And everyone turned to me. I was dead silent because I didn't know what would happen. My dad asked me, "Well, why do you object?" And I said I did not know what would happen if I did, and I was promptly seated. Edit obligatory. Thanks for the silver. Edit 2 and gold. Story 21. A friend of the couples in cosplay armor, think Master Chief, ran and asked the date. Said, "Then I'm not too late." Pointed a big fake spacey rifle at the bride and said, "Mother of the Xenocide." The fruit of thy womb will never destroy my planet. Not her name, and the groom went her name. Is her name seriously this is date yes time yes almost right location oh no you want other very similar location one so commonly confused the invitations had mentioned it oh my bad have a nice day theater. Majors man I do not even. Story 22. At my own wedding, but not in the traditional way. We were getting married along a river at the end of summer and tons of wakeboarders and boats were out. I was a ball of nerves and the ceremony felt so serious. When all of a sudden some dude bro on a boat blasting music screamed, "Don't do it bro," and sped off. It was actually hilarious and made the rest of the ceremony a lot more fun. My husband and I cracked up even though his brothers looked like they were about to jump in the river after the guy. On mobile, sorry for formatting issues. Story 23. I was 1 year old when my mom married my stepdad. During the objection portion, I yelled stop, but no one listened. They divorced 6 years later. I told you, Mom, I told you. Story 24. My aunt was getting married to her second husband, and during the speak now or forever hold your peace bit, their baby started crying. The dude officiating it said, if anyone older than 6 months has any OBCS, speak now or forever hold your peace. He got a laugh and the wedding carried on. They're still together 10 years later, so I guess whatever my cousin had to say was misinformed. Story 25. I don't understand that if someone objected and get thrown out during the ceremony anyway, then why would they open the chance for them to object in the first place? Can't they just cut off that line and let the bride and groom kiss in peace? Story 26. I was best man at a wedding and the groom's older sister decided to play a joke and stood up and said I object, then started giggling. Groom's mother stood up, slapped her, told her it was not an appropriate joke, and told her to go home. This mother still refuses to talk to her daughter. 4 years later, edit wow, went to bed and woke up to all the comments. But for those of you asking, it was not the first time this daughter in particular had done something to piss this mom off, and this was the first time I had ever seen this mom hit any of her kids. I've known the family 15 years. I also found out later that the mom had spent over $50K on this wedding. Story 27. I was at an Orthodox Jewish wedding with a chuppah ceremony where they read a contract and recite 7 blessings. The groom's dad pinched his son's derriere at a most solemn moment, caused him to loudly shriek. Into the silent audience of 400 brides saw and snorted loudly. They also publicly kissed after the ceremony, which was a huge scandal. Edit bride and groom kissed. Populace could speak of nothing else for months. Edit 2. No, it's not against Jewish law, it's the community's sensibilities. They just do not do PDA. Edit 3. It wasn't an objection, but it sure sounded like one during the reading of the contract. Story 28. To be fair, I didn't witness this, but it happened to my parents. My mom invited an ex she was still rather close with to her wedding, and he stood up and yelled, I object. Little did everyone at the wedding know my dad had gotten rather close with him and paid him to stand up and object just for the sh and giggles, and he bursts out laughing. My mom didn't find it as funny, and it really started their marriage off on the right foot. Story 29. I heard of a wedding in which a guy ran and told the bride that the groom was actually already married and had his madwoman wife and the objector sister locked away in his attic, so they all went to see the crazy wife and proved she existed, but she later died in a house fire that left the groom blind, and the bride still took him back wild. Story 30. Not speak now part, but well, you'll see. Friend of mine was getting married in the park under the trees because both of them were nature people, and groom had a dog that went everywhere with him that wasn't allowed in any church because dog. Despite being well-tread and quiet, there were some rows of chairs with lots of people filling them, including groom's mother, who was sitting with his dog. Bride and groom were at the front with the efficient. Efficient begins. Efficient comes to the part where he says, do you take? Groom's dog Shadow began to howl, a loud, long, mournful howl. Everyone laughed. Efficient started the question again, loud, long, mournful howl again. Everyone laughed. Groom told Shadow to come to the front. Shadow ran up, stood directly in between the bride and groom, and the Efficient started again. Not a peep from Shadow. Her vows, his vows. Efficient looked at Shadow and asked Shadow, do you take bride and groom to be your lawfully wedded parents? Shadow barked one single bark. Efficient concluded the ceremony. Everyone cheered and clapped, and Shadow barked 3 times, the only times that he made any sounds. Not kidding. Beautiful dog too. Story 31. So I'm attending this ultra-chill beach wedding in small town Canada. I don't know most anyone because it was my ex-step-aunt's, so my brother's family. I never see. It was fun anyways. The bride flew in on a seaplane And all the chairs were set up on the sand anyways. The groom is from Trinidad and Tobago, so all his relatives traveled a long way and had cool accents. There was a party. Before we were all a little bit tipsy, so as the ceremony progresses, everyone is watching, getting teary from the vows. Then the line comes, any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony? Speak now. Nobody expected this. The father of the groom gets up flailing, and a collective gasp followed by silence overtakes this tiny venue. We're all waiting with bated breath, but he's just standing there with glassy eyes. Turns out he was baked. This 70-plus man in a suit and in dreads laughs and says, "No, I kid. And the whole spirit of the audience cheers up as he sits back down. Rest of the reception people are going up to him saying good one or scolding him good night. Best wedding I've been to." Story 32. I used to be an audio engineer. This one smaller chapel, I was running sound for a wedding, and the officiant got to that station. In the ceremony, the woman stood up and said something. My station was recessed into the wall, and I couldn't quite hear her. She spoke for 5 or 6 seconds, and the room had a few upset, shocked sounds. Another woman on the of the room near me just spoke up saying, "Don't you listen to nothing she has to say. You two go ahead and get married." The room laughed, and the ceremony persisted. Story 33. I once went to a wedding where both families were Irish. Jeff knew them, but I didn't. At the ceremony, the groom's ex-wife started shouting and was gently directed outside. I couldn't hear what was said. The reception was amazing, nice venue, and all but a bunch of guests had brought their own instruments and just started jamming what I can only describe as a genuine Irish jig. This went on for hours and remains a lasting memory of oral beauty. But I digress. There was a lot of booze. There was no responsible serving of alcohol, and I'm certain it was by design. At some point, I used the men's room and was curious if I'd just seen the groom in a stall door open with someone who was not the bride. I didn't know these people, and it might have just been someone else, so said nothing. Sometime later, and the GF states, "Seriously, we should get going now." "Yes, sure." We grab our ship and head downstairs. I see the suspicious fellow again in the stairwell going to absolute town on this same lady. GF grabs my arm tightly and keeps walking past, mumbles a thank you for the invite. I just smile and follow, cause it's all weird. Yep. That was the groom octopus and his ex-wife at his own wedding to another woman. The bride genuinely seemed a gem. The look that woman gave us as we passed was this smugly dominant, "I always get what I want," drunk as glare. While they had some reasonable bubbly in a tub for people to take home, and who would know or care if we hit a few extras. I got it all explained to me after we were in a cab, and well, on our way home I never got a follow-up to that story, but 10 tenths on the music would tag along to an Irish wedding again. Story 34. I attended a wedding as a guest of a family member, and when their pastor said that the doors busted open to the sanctuary and a man appeared and started to say "I do," but 2 huge ushers, one who was my date, quickly grabbed the guy before he could say anything but under the arms and literally lifted him up off the floor and carried him out. The wedding continued as normal. Turned out the guy was the ex of the bride. Strangest sight I ever saw. Story 35. Friend was getting married to his heroin-addicted girlfriend. Myself, his brother, and his mom all made it very clear that what he was doing was incredibly stupid. She's a bad influence on him. She's going nowhere in life, and the only reason he's marrying her is because she enables him. We told him we won't attend the wedding. His mom made it perfectly clear his wife would not be invited to any family functions. So what did my buddy do? He got married to his heroin-addicted girlfriend. The divorce was finalized 9 months later. Went about as well as everyone said it would. Not very. Story 36. This was in the early 70s and semi-rural Washington state. My cousin was getting married, and my aunt and the mother of the groom did not get along well during the ceremony. When the pastor got to the part about objecting, my aunt said something to my uncle, and the groom's mom jumped up and grabbed my aunt, and they started going at it all the way out the door and into the parking area. They were separated, and everyone filed back into the barn where the wedding continued. The best part, though, was when another one of my cousins simply walked into the woods after the wedding because that's where he lived. Story 37. It was a medieval-themed wedding. The best man declared his love for the bride, challenged the groom to a fight for her love. They march outside, draw swords, and go at it. Apparently they choreographed 2 nights a week for like 6 months. But it honestly looked like they were trying to kill each other. The groom wins, and everything goes on like normal. 0 encore. A weird but cool edit, corrected groomsman to groom. Thanks all. Story 38. Mom got married to my stepdad. Uncle objected after the attention was focused on him. He just asked if they were still going fishing afterwards, to which my stepdad reached into his suit and pulled out his fishing hat. Very sweet. and romantic. They love to fish together. Rip though, remind me to upload the video. Wish I could find a cheap way to digitize the VH to upload it online. Edit. Bought a VH TV combo. Story 39. This might not count, but it was like 12 hours before the wedding. One of my ex's best friends had a destination wedding in Mexico. Both parties stayed in a huge mansion house overlooking the water. I wasn't in the wedding party, but I was in a hotel close by. The night before the wedding, the bridesmaids and groomsmen stayed up late partying. Everyone passed out, but at midnight or so the bride's mom woke up because she heard the living room speakers. Since they had been playing music, she happens to hear noise coming from outside, and she goes out there, and the maid of honor was in the hot tub having together with the groom. Maid of honor had been raised by bride's mom, basically like a second mom thing, so she was shocked to say the least. They had just bought a house to the wedding never happened, and I enjoyed my vacation and returned the dress. Edit super after the fact, but I did some research, and last year they made up, got married, and had a kid. I feel bad for the girl for not just kicking him aside. Story 40. Not at a wedding, but at a funeral. A young man mid-20s had passed away rather suddenly in some sort of accident. His wife of a year or so and their respective families and friends are all in attendance. As they are getting ready to lower him into the ground, the pastor dude asks if anyone would like to say anything further, and another woman in her early 30s stood up. She began to tell everyone in attendance about how much pain she was in over the loss of the love of her life, and that the two of them were meant going to be together, and now they can't. Yep, the poor wife had to find out about the cheating at the funeral. Story 41. My cousin was big into bodybuilding when he was younger and has always been really tall. Around the time he got married, he was probably 66, 260 pounds. I was 18 at the time, and I'll never forget when the priest asked, "Are there any objections to this union?" My cousin turned to the crowd and opened his arms wide and gestured as if daring someone to object. The whole place erupted in laughter. It was amazing. Story 42. For anyone wondering how rare this happens, I work weddings something like 50-60 a year. My boss has been doing similar numbers for the last 30 years. He has never seen nor heard of this happening at any of the weddings he's worked. Story 43. My boyfriend was friends with a guy who was getting a quickie marriage and needed witnesses. We agreed and went inside the little reception room where the preacher, bride, and the groom were lined up, waiting on us. The preacher ate his thing, and I noticed a woman come in and lean against the back wall. She looked pissed, standing with her arms crossed. Preacher, is there anyone here today who objects to the union of asterisk 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 and asterisk 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 asterisk? Please speak now. The couple looked back at us, and we both smiled. Suddenly the bride's attention turned to the woman in the back of the room. Bride, what the F asterisk 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 is she doing here? The woman quickly raises her hand, looking at the old preacher. Woman, I object. I don't agree with this marriage. The bride glares at her. Bride, shut up. Wait, your turn. It's my scheduled day. You're just mad you didn't think of it first. The woman had to be dragged out of the room, kicking and screaming and spitting at the bride. After the reception, my BFS friend explained that he was originally in a relationship with the bride. After 10 years together, he started sleeping with her sister, the woman. They were close sisters until both ladies got pregnant by him simultaneously. They fought each other like cats and dogs for the next several years until the two cousins became school aged and best friends. Neither one of the sisters would give up the man, and he wasn't sure which one he loved more, so he kept seeing both women. Last I heard, they were all still together, but the two sisters had teamed up to take down his pregnant mistress. Story 44. Got booted out of my cousin's wedding reception with about 20 other people. My cousin had her wedding on a farm with a massive pig roast. From what I remember, there was a massive amount of people anyway. Her father and my other older cousin never really got along. At one point during the reception, my older cousin had enough and absolutely lost it. He looked at a handful of us and asked if we had his back. Of course, we all nodded. Not really knowing what was about to happen, he disappeared, and a few minutes later comes back with a 20 pounds bag of pork meat from the leftover roast. He walks down to where my cousin's dad is. My aunt proceeds to yell "El no" and smacks him right in the side of the face with the bag of meat. An all-out family brawl ensued. The whole family hasn't been invited to a wedding ever since. Story 45. My dad insisted on having this in his and my mom's wedding because he wanted it to mean speak now or forever ever hold your peace, meaning my mom was his piece of ass. Almost 40 years later, they're still married. Side note, When he walked me down the aisle at my first wedding, he let me know I could still say no even 2 steps from Pachelbel's canon in D. I said nope and giggled. Silly me, we were divorced 6 years later. Story 46. Musician here play frequently at weddings. This was by far my worst one ever, not at the moment of speak now, but still pretty impressive. Groom books my string quartet for the entire day, ceremony, drinks, meal. All seems to go well, though you can tell the groom's family is much more well off than the bride's, and she seems to be a bit of an attention, but either way ceremony and drinks went without a hitch. Everyone seemed very happy. Fast forward to the meal, we played through the whole thing, and as we were packing up they started speeches. Usually we'd have left by this point, but our stuff was in a little side room off the banquet room, separated only by salon-style swing doors, and we had no way of getting out unless we walked awkwardly between the guest tables, so we decided to stay put until the speeches were over and listen, and best man's and fob speeches went well, and then it was left to the groom. He thanked everyone for coming and then said that for his speech he needed everyone to open the envelopes that had been placed on the tables. We'd noticed these on the way in but hadn't thought anything of it. There was an excited bustling as people appointed someone on each table to open the envelopes, followed shortly by a very quick change in the atmosphere. Someone gasped and another person audibly said, "What the is this?" Amongst the general confusion, the groom gets back on the microphone and says, "Yes, I'm sorry to say that what you see in these pictures has been going on for about 2 months. Needless to say, I will be annulling the marriage. Thank you all for coming." Turns out the bride had been having an affair with the best man, and the groom had found out and hired a private investigator to photograph them, and he'd printed the pictures and put them in the envelopes. Of course, chaos ensued. The groom dropped mic and bailed immediately. The bride's mother threw red wine all over her dress and kept screaming that she was along with an awful lot of things, alluding to the fact that she'd never find another good rich man again. The groom's 2 brothers beat up the best man pretty badly. There was a lot of screaming and glass throwing. The bride was crying uncontrollably, and everyone left as it was so awkward. We just hid in our little side room until everyone had gone, and then emerged slightly shell-shocked to inspect the pictures. There could be no doubt as to what was happening in them. The groom emailed us a few days later and apologized to us as he realized we got stuck. He explained that he'd only found out a fortnight before the wedding, and having paid for everything with little chance of refunds, he just decided to go ahead with it and out her so that she couldn't twist the story to her family. After the fact, how he made it through the entire wedding I will never know, but it certainly made for an interesting day at work. Story 47. I'm not sure if it actually counts, but when my mother married my now stepfather, it was originally supposed to be an outdoor wedding near the edge of a lake, but the day of the weather turned bad, so they switched it last minute to a church about 100 feet away from the original spot. No big deal. I'm pretty sure this place was built exclusively for weddings because it had a church and reception hall along with like 20 small buildings, each with 2-3 rooms. Except one that was one room anyways. Both of my mother's parents are dead, so I'm the one that gets to give her away. I'm around 11-12 at this time. I also had to give away my stepfather for reasons I'll add after this. I give them away. The ceremony is coming to an end and the minister asks if anyone has any objections. It's quiet for a couple seconds. Then asterisk boom asterisk huge crack of thunder. It's over a decade later and we still joke about it. A few extra things that happened. My now stepbrother refused to go because he hated my mom. 3 weeks before the wedding, my stepdad's parents said my mom had been sleeping with his brother. We hadn't seen them in years. 2 weeks before the wedding, my stepdad's parents left a message on the answering machine about how my mother was a terrible daughter for getting married 3 months after her mother died. My grandma had been telling them they should get married for 4 or 5 years already at that point, and this was the final straw where everyone was uninvited. All in all, though, it was a relatively fun wedding. I did all the stuff that the father in the wedding usually does because I was the only one really for it. My uncle was my stepdad's best man, and my other uncle couldn't make it as for a more fun wedding though. When my uncle got married, I was 20 and he got married at a relative's house that had a very large property, and they set up a beautiful outdoor wedding there. They also set up a great alcohol tent, and the closest people, including me to the newlyweds, spent the entire night drinking and partying. We ate breakfast before we went to bed. It was amazing. I don't remember anything after the ceremony. Story 48. I'm a pastor and I officiated a wedding once where the groom had a little too much to drink before the ceremony. Not a huge deal to me, but his sister, who was a bridesmaid, found out. She got pissed, and as I was walking down a hallway after using the restroom, I overheard her talking to him, and she said something along the lines of, "If you have one more beer, I'm telling the bride what you did last night." I was unsure what to do. I felt like it wasn't my place to intervene, so I didn't say anything. The Wedding went fine and they are still married. I'm still curious as to what he did. Edit grammatical errors. Story 49. I've never been to a wedding where this was asked. I had a friend who was going to say something because our friend the groom was still in love with his ex and only proposed to the new girl because she hinted that she'd leave him like the ex did, but the minister never asked and we all told the friend not to object and don't know if he would have. The bride and groom are still married as far as I know. Story 50. Two disasters. My Jewish friend married a Gentile woman. His immediate family were secular and didn't object, but his grandmother started bawling loudly at the start of the wedding ceremony, yelling and Yiddish for somebody to stop them and making a huge scene. When the family tried to remove her, she said some other stuff in Yiddish as well, but nobody was willing to translate whatever it was for us non-speakers. My nephew, who had had a severe head injury and wasn't quite right, got engaged to a very combative woman nobody liked. Try though they did. It began at the rehearsal dinner. The father of the bride, she being the youngest of his 8 daughters, unsteadily walked to my nephew's dad and stated, "Tell your son he's making a big mistake. She's the worst of the lot." The wedding itself actually went okay, but as the couple walked out of the church and went to get into the limo, my nephew decided to invite the best man and his date to ride with them. The bride wasn't having this and loudly declared so, turned into a huge fight, and the limo driver had to stop and drag my nephew out and put him in a separate car against all odds. The reception went off without bloodshed, but proceedings didn't end well. They went to an island honeymoon resort, and after 2 days the owner kicked them out because of their unceasing screaming fights. The end took several more years. One night my phone rang. After midnight, it was my nephew calling from a phone booth. He tells me rather Cal that she's trying to kill him. At that moment there was a huge crashing noise. She had run the car into the phone booth. Fortunately there were steel and concrete posts protecting the booth from just such a situation, and he escaped relatively unscathed. She was too obese to pursue him any distance on foot. The divorce took 2 more years. Story 51. My sister was mad at me because we didn't give her a chance to object. My wife and I got married in a judge's chambers with a court clerk and BFF as witnesses. When I made the announcement to my family, my sister got mad. She wanted to be there, especially when it came time for an objection. I asked why she would object to my wedding. She said, "Any woman stupid enough to marry me deserved the warning." I don't talk to my sister anymore. Story 52. Late to the party on this one, but went to a wedding several years ago that was an interracial couple. I was friends with both and they are still married to this day with a couple of kids. Bride's racist as aunt stands up after the vows and yells, "I'll be bad if my niece is going to marry us." She apparently had not been invited but showed up anyways. Needless to say, she didn't make it to the reception. Story 53. I went to a cousin's wedding once and the groom's mother didn't have to verbally object. It was written all over her face the entire time, including as she was walked down the aisle to be seated. And throughout the reception we still talk about it, and almost 10 years later she still hasn't forgiven him for marrying my cousin, and we still don't know why they don't speak. Unrelated, but my stepsister knocked my mom out at my brother's wedding rehearsal dinner. Totally normal kind of event at the time. In our family, FYI for those who think differently, but money most definitely does not buy class. It was a $30,000 wedding. Story 54. When my sister married her now ex-husband and TH asked for objections, I just screamed, "I don't like him, he's not pretty," and started bawling. I was 5 at the time. Story 55. Went to a cousin's wedding a couple years ago. They had a fairly nice wedding outdoors in a country club. They had a dog, Shiloh, who was a Chesapeake Retriever mix. He was the ring boy when the pastor got to the part of objections. The dog turned around suddenly because there was ducks in the fountain area and let out a long howl and barks. Everyone laughed and the groom remarked, "Shiloh, I love you, the boy, you'll get ducks soon." They moved the dog out of the area to finish the wedding, but that dog was a highlight of the wedding. He passed away last year due to a large tumor in his stomach. He lived to be 13. Note: yes, Shiloh did get duck at the end, along with some love and attention from every attendant. The cousin treated Shiloh like her own kid, had him since she was 14. Story 56. I was seriously considering objecting at the wedding of my best friend. I knew the guy was no good for her. We used to have feelings for each other, but stayed friends for about 10 years. I got married, she was getting married, but something didn't feel right. Her wedding was public at a local festival, and I almost showed up and did it. 2 years later, we are both divorced and happily together. Story 57. We'll probably get buried as I'm a little late to the party, but oh well, this is a good excuse to tell one of my favorite stories. About 2 years ago, I attended a wedding in Nice, France. It was my older cousin getting married to his girlfriend. The fiancée was French, and so is my cousin's dad. However, my auntie is from Scotland, so my cousin James, the groom, is half French, half Scottish. Anyway, an argument ensued before the wedding as my family wanted the wedding to be in Scotland and my cousin's dad and future wife wanted it to be in France. They settled in France, and to say the very least, my family were not happy. Me and my mom were happy for the excuse to go to France, but my extended family were fuming. They just could not get over it. Anyway, we got to France 2 days before the wedding. On the day, we went to a beautiful converted barn in Nice and waited as the barn filled up with family and friends. My extended family weren't there, and my cousin's dad was fuming that they'd refused to come due to it not being in Scotland. My cousin stood nervously awaiting his future wife. She came out, and all went smoothly. They began the cows, and when it came the time to object, almost an impeccable timing, the door to the barn berth opened, and in came 15-20 of my extended family dressed in kilts, and 3 of them brandishing bagpipes. They stormed down the aisle playing the bagpipes badly and singing the Scottish in them. In football chants, everyone in the barn turned horrified to see them storming around and singing. The bride laughed hysterically, but my cousin didn't look happy. Then my great uncle took to the stage and said, we James the First was going to scalp your we behind, but we decided it best to join the festivities. Congratulations from us all. The Scottish lot are entombed, and we're here for the free bar and some frogs' legs. People erupted with laughter, and even the French side of my family had a giggle. The wedding continued as normal, and the beautiful, elegant reception was overrun with kilt-wearing clowns singing and dancing at every opportunity. Was a grand night, and one I'll never forget. By Story 58. I went to a wedding of a girl I had a crush on for many years, but was too stupid and afraid to make a move on her. Ran into her on her hen night, and she told me she always loved me, and why I didn't do anything about it. She was unsure of still marrying him. I told her I loved her too, but didn't want to be the guy who broke up a wedding a week prior, had to sit there and watch her get married. One of the most gut-wrenching things I ever had to watch, especially when the forever hold your peace part came, and I remained silent. Fast forward a few years, the arsehole cheated on her and her over. She moved back to the other side of the country to be with me. Now I'm engaged to her, and we are trying for a baby. Destiny, it's a mother. Story 59. I've posted this before and my family found me, but whatever, it's my Kate Day true story. My father has been married 5 times, and at the last wedding it happened twice. July 7th, 2007, the family and friends began to gather, all of us taking turns trying to talk him out of marrying the woman he had only met a few months before, but his mind was set since the date was so popular and arrangements were made so late. The minister was a used car salesman with a certificate from an online site. The wedding and reception were held in my father's backyard that happened to be right next door to his best friend, which he proves to be that day. I was resigned to my fate of best man that day, my first and only time with that honor. When the ceremony began, my father began with a speech explaining how 2 people could meet and fall in love in such a short time, and that he knew it was hard to believe, and that's when his best friend, just in time from his fishing trip, raised his tank airy and tonic to ask, is this the part where we object? Cause I'd like to. In all my life I've never witnessed the mix of relief, SL shock, SLH humor, SLH horror, and all the other emotions this stirred. My sister cried, his friends laughed, her family cringed, but my sweet grandmother was so stoic. I'll never forget my father calmly said, "No bud, not yet," and went on. He began to talk about other relationships and people, and how he knew this a marriage they would last, and that's when our hero spoke again. How about now? I really need to object to this. The same sentiment was felt throughout, and yet my father replied, "No bud, we're not doing that," and then turned to the minister and said we should probably skip that part. The ceremony went on, and so did the marriage for about 6 months. TL Drive. My dad's best friend objected at his wedding, and my dad wished he had listened. Story 60. So not during this part, but I was a wedding planner with a local company, and that entailed me attending receptions to make sure everything ran smoothly. Prior to the ceremony, the grandfather asked me which room the groom was in so he could have a chat with him. I walked him to the room, and he gave the groom plane tickets and a hotel reservations, completely paid for. Degree. The parents had told the bride and groom not to make plans after the wedding for 2 weeks, as it's customary in their family for grandparents to gift the honeymoon. The groom starts crying and thanks the grandparents. Groom puts the stuff in his coat pocket to thank the grandparents during the reception. And surprise, the bride ceremony over, everyone all smiles, cocktail flow ends, everyone sits down to dinner, and they do the introductions. The entire bridal party is now seated. Best man, groom's brother makes a speech, sister of the bride, matron of honor makes a speech, groom makes a speech to his bride. I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you to our family, the generous support, and to grandma and grandpa for giving us a once-in-a-lifetime trip to Greece. Cried, crying applause. But he continues, I won't be taking this trip. Throws down everything from his pocket. My brother and wife should be taking this trip, seeing as she's been effing dollar at and dollar him for the last 6 months, and just walks out. Story 61. I was a groomsman in a wedding 2 years ago. The bride and groom had been together for right around 4 years. They decided to write their own vows. The groom went through his. They were sweet. He is a really great dude. The wife decided that during the vows is the appropriate time to let him and everyone else know that he would soon be a father. Everyone was crying, hugging. It was a pretty cool moment, especially being from the Midwest Bible Belt, where that kind of thing normally gets frowned upon. Everything was going great up until a point in the reception where the bride was talking to a friend of hers, telling her how excited she was to be having a girl. Somehow no one caught this except the groom, who got up, threw his drink at the wall and shattered it, called his new wife a stupid and told her she was a cheating, and stormed out. The bride started crying and swore she never cheated on him and couldn't believe he was ruining their special day. The other groomsmen and I ran outside to see what was up with him, and then it hit all of us at the same time. She was 16 weeks pregnant, and he had only been home from Afghanistan for 8 weeks. She didn't think that anyone would catch that, and was somehow going to try and convince her husband they were having the baby early. I have not heard much from him or her since the wedding, but it was heavily rumored that the pregnancy was a result of a one-night stand with one of my buddy's cousins. Told her wife cheats on husband and gets pregnant while husband is overseas. Tells husband she's pregnant, forgets timeline of pregnancy when talking to a friend. Story 62. I'm a pastor, and I typically don't include that part because it's a little bit antiquated. I performed my brother's wedding a few years ago. They had it at this beautiful farm, one of those trendy rustic event venues. And because I wanted to troll him a little, I planned to ask if anyone had an objection to the union, and then just wait an uncomfortably long time with a great punchline where I would lean over to his bride and say, sorry, I really tried. You can have your $20 back, to make it seem like she asked me to create an opportunity where she didn't have to marry him as a big brother. It seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime, but what happened was way better. After I asked for an objection and everything was quiet, some random sheep in the field behind us let out the biggest bleed I've ever heard. The comedic timing was perfect. It was hilarious, and everyone completely lost it. It was the day I learned that sheep are funnier than me. Story 63. Witnessed this a few months ago. Random guest stood up and proceeded to basically declare his love for the bride and pour his heart out, saying that it should been him up on the altar that day. Whole room went dead silent. Bride went red with embarrassment and groom went red with anger. Best man promptly called for DJ MC to start playing music. All this was in front of the random person's wife. Didn't go down too well. Story 64. The time where the officiant asked, speak now or forever hold your peace, and then a friend of the couple's burst out of the crowd declaring his love for the bride, playing the Titanic theme song on his violin and grabbing her from the altar. Then the groom gave a PowerPoint presentation on why he should be the husband. It was all staged. Needless to say, there was also a skit involving vomit. Great wedding. Story 65. I witnessed an almost objection. I offered to be my ex-boyfriend's +1 to a wedding between the woman he broke up with me over but never got with, and the groom. He was still in love with her, but one of her best friends. And when he got really drunk told me he was planning to object, but I talked him out of it, or so I thought. Later, when there was a chance to object, he started to get up, but I pushed him back down with a hand to his chest. Pretty sure a handful of people noticed, including the bride. She looked at him for a second, but couldn't read her expression and no idea if it meant anything. It was never addressed later. A fake. This was over a year ago. Bride and groom are still together. No idea if they're happy. My ex-boyfriend and friend is getting over her slowly, though I really wonder what would have happened had I not stopped him. Both the drama that would have ensued because of an objection, and if maybe there could have been something between them. By the way, I still have feelings for him. Story 66. I was at a friend's wedding. Her family very religious and is not at all. One of her cousins stood up and said that she knew they had been living in sin and engaging in premarital intercourse. After that, a number of her family members left the venue and others stayed but turned their backs to the couple being married. Very strange reception, as some of those that stayed but turned their backs actually showed up. The marriage failed after a short time, and an accusation of a pregnancy not being the Husband's child, very strange people in the end, considering that while we were all friends for a time it all seemed good, but since then, while we still know them and see them around, it has just become like a contest of which one can sleep with the most people from their past histories. Story 67. When I was around 14-15, I attended my stepdad's auntie's wedding. She was probably in her late 50s at the time, and so was her fiancé. They had been child sweethearts, but eventually separated, met new partners, married, and had their own families. Fast forward 30 years or so, and they met again online, and both decided to leave their families to rekindle the old flame. Immediately decided to get married. So anyway, the lady conducting the ceremony in a hotel gets to the part about speak now, etc. when the groom's ex-wife comes running in from behind us screaming, "You lying, you stole my husband, I'll kill you." She runs towards them both, tries to pick up a chair and throw it, but two of my uncles decided to rugby tackle her to the floor. Before she could let go, turns out she had sold the story to a kind of lifestyle magazine we have in the UK called Take a Break, and there was a photographer waiting outside to get some pics. Needless to say, it was the best wedding ceremony I've ever attended. Story 68. Bride and groom had their friends rush out for a choreographed objection, dressed up in costumes, wielding foam swords. The bride and groom then pulled out foam swords, fought them, high-fived, and finished their ceremony. It was ridiculous, but not surprising love, my friends. Story 69. I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about that one time when I had to play the groom's gay lover in a fake wedding we held when I went to Folkhog School, some Norwegian. Google it. What happened, you ask? Well, I stopped the wedding, went up to the bride and groom, confessed my love for him, mumbled and sobbed something about that one time he lifted me up like they do in Greece. Don't know if they got it. Sounds awfully a lot like grizz means pig in Norwegian. Was going to kiss him but chickened out and hugged him instead. Got applause and a lot of obscure grins on my way out. Then the wedding went on and I just sat there and watched. Felt weird. Story 70. At my wedding, the priest used the wrong name when asking my wife to be if she would marry me. He said, "So I ask you, will you take Karsten as your husband?" My wife promptly answered with a clear voice, "No." And then my father-in-law shouted from the back, "His name is Casper." Too late, as all of the guests in the church were rolling on the floor of laughter. Quite embarrassing for the priest, but funny for us. Story 71. Well, actually this happened at my wedding and it was pretty funny. So my best man joking said, "I object. Hey, I always secretly loved you. I know we're meant to be together. Please don't do this." And I just looked at him with this death stare after everyone just started laughing. It was a pretty fun joke. We even joked about it later. Bonus material: this friend of mine is really closer than a brother to me, and we all knew he was going to pull something at the wedding, but didn't know what. My asterisk now and still asterisk wife was totally fine with it. Edit spelling. Story 72. When I got married, my wife's ex-boyfriend showed up at the wedding uninvited, got really drunk, and before the ceremony even started said he objected and still loved my wife. He had a 12-minute long speech on how she was too good for me, which she is, but still can he let her know that, and on how I was a shad, which was again true, but still this pissed everyone off, including my regiment brothers, who then picked him up and threw him out. It didn't leave that big of a mark on the day other than make us a bit late, but my biggest question was, what was he thinking? Story 73. Family story. Not sure if it happened at this point in the ceremony, but my maternal grandparents' wedding was interrupted by a woman with 2 babies claiming they were my grandfather's and that he was abandoning the kids. And her grandparents still got married. Supposedly my grandmother resented him for this, but in the older times women couldn't just leave. All this was well before my time, though I guess old world Poland was a swinging place. Story 74. Apparently, I happened. The groom objected, so did my wife. Introduced them to each other in high school, best friend to both, so much so that they threatened to put me in a half-tuck, half-bridesmaid outfit. All of this to say that at the vows, standing beside the groom and minding my own business, I hear the preacher say, "Do you take tail or gunner to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Me, wait, what? Groom, no, she does not, cause my name is John. As it turns out, the preacher had officiated another wedding the day before. The previous groom had my first name. Preacher had forgotten to cross the old name out and write John's name instead. Story 75. At my sister's wedding, all was going great. Only close friends and family are in attendance, and amongst them are a gaggle of children. The registrar has got through all of her lines. The children have all behaved beautifully, and we have just finished. If anyone has any lawful objections, then an almighty squawk rings around the chapel, my 2-year-old niece being the proud reason. The registrar was quiet for a moment and then said, "I think we can ignore that one. My niece is 6 now and still has perfect comedic timing." Story 76. I've performed 24 weddings and attended hundreds. I've never seen one where this question was asked. It's still in the Anglican Episcopal Book of Common Prayer, but I'm told even their clergy often omitted it. Was originally intended to prevent bigamy or incest. Nowadays there are easier methods of detecting such things, and so its inclusion is obsolete. Needless to say, weddings tend to be dramatic enough without giving everyone present an opportunity to throw a winch into things. Story 77. I was part of it actually, but was planned by the bride and groom. Was part of a foam fighting group, and we swore we wouldn't lose another brother, and charged upstage with weapons, and the groom and the groomsman and a bridesmaid grabbed their own and fought back. Everyone seemed to love it and wanted to try some fighting afterwards, so it was a huge hit. Story 78. Was at a friend's wedding. It was being held outdoors. It had been sunny and hot all day up until the wedding. Some dark clouds were rolling and the ceremony began, and when the minister asked the infamous question, lightning struck a tree about a kilometer from where we were all standing. They got divorced less than a year later. Story 79. I can't find the source now. It was in a small regional French paper, but I read about a lady in France who said no when asked if she took her husband as her husband because she thought it would be funny. They stopped the wedding immediately and postponed it pending investigation under arranged for passport forced marriage laws. Story 80. At a Western reenactment wedding, a guy got up and began to protest, and the preacher pulled out a revolver filled with blanks and shot him before asking anyone else. Story 81. I was at a wedding as the priest asked if anyone objected, and a guy walked in late at that moment and his phone GPS bellows, "You have reached your destination." Priest had a great sense of humor and says, "Well, that confirms it, then you are where you are meant to be," and continued with the ceremony.